Hello and thank you for joining us. I'm Wilson Stribling. Welcome to another edition of At Issue, where we discuss and debate the issues facing the state of Mississippi and how these issues impact you. The big news from week 11 of the legislative session did not come from action in the House or Senate, but from one lawmaker, Republican State Senator Chris McDaniel. He announced that he will drop out of the U.S. Senate race against Roger Wicker and run instead in the special election for the seat of retiring U.S. Senator Thad Cochran. McDaniel told reporters on Thursday that outside forces from Washington, more specifically Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, are trying to influence the election. Here's McDaniel on his reasons for switching races.
It really troubled me to keep hearing these reports that Mitch McConnell was in Mississippi or having his people in Mississippi trying to influence this process. The people of our state recognize that Washington is broken. They recognize there's this disconnect between Washington and the people of our state. And so to see Mitch McConnell down here bringing the swamp to Mississippi, cutting deals and schemes, for goodness sakes, even the timing of Senator Cochran's resignation was timed specifically so I would not jump in that race. I think the people of this state are tired of the games. They're tired of the schemes. They're tired of the plans. And so the idea is that to go ahead, announce, explain to Mitch McConnell that his help here, or whatever the case is, his interference here isn't needed, and then perhaps more importantly, to recognize that we have a unique opportunity to unite the party in a special election around a single candidate, one that's already in the race. Why does that matter? Well, we've seen what happens when there's these intra-party wars or these bloodbaths that occur. And what I have here is a situation where I'm running for the same seat that I ran for in 2014, the same seat that we thought we won in 2014. Now, God had other plans for that, obviously, and that's okay. We accept that. All I'm asking now is to be allowed to finish that term that we ran for in 2014. I'm just asking the people of Mississippi to consider hiring me for that short time period. I'll fight for you. If I fail you in any way, if I don't do a good job between the time I go in and the time of 2020, the new election, then you can bring me home. But all I'm asking is the opportunity to finish the seat that I feel like we won in 2014.
Governor Phil Bryant will appoint someone to take Senator Cochran's seat on an interim basis when the senator retires on April 1st. That person will serve until the special election in November. The governor says McDaniel switching races is sad and opportunistic, and that McDaniel is not being considered on the list of possible appointees.
I just would say there's a reason to run for public office. You need to know what office you're seeking and why, and it's not a personal reason. It is a reason of how you can do the most good, where you can serve. And so if you're just trying to be something, if you just want to be a senator or be governor, this is probably not the work for you. If you want to serve and do the most good in public life, that should be your choice. And I'm not assigning any motive to anyone whatsoever, but it seems unusual to be campaigning and saying I'm going to run against the establishment, and then all of a sudden say I think I found an easier path, and I'm going to run against whoever the governor of the state of Mississippi might appoint to be in this position, whoever that is. We're going to make a really good appointment. I'm going to stand by whoever is appointed. I'm going to campaign with them. I'm going to help them raise money. This silly notion that there's some outside force that Mitch McConnell is going to call and tell me who to select is just absolutely ridiculous. And I would take offense to anyone suggesting that I could be moved one way or the other by anyone outside the state of Mississippi. I think it'd be very likely that the president would support whomever is selected here in Mississippi and the vice president.
So McDaniel's not on the list?
He is not on the list.
The Mississippi Tea Party is urging Governor Bryant to change his mind and appoint Chris McDaniel to Cochran's seat. A group of Tea Party supporters rallied at the Capitol just hours before McDaniel made his announcement about switching races. They say McDaniel has already passed the test to represent Mississippi in the U.S. Senate when he ran against Cochran and narrowly lost that election in 2014.
This is what it boils down to: the consent of the governed. Chris McDaniel has already passed the test of the consent of those who would be governed. And so when we look at the things that are at stake, it is the voices of the American people, beginning right here in Mississippi. And it's also another thing, integrity. Integrity of the Republican Party. The integrity of the word conservative. What do those words mean anymore? Does anyone know? Is anyone caring?
We will talk more about McDaniel's decision with Austin and Brandon later in the program. Now back to the legislature. This was a deadline week for appropriations bills to fund state government agencies. The budget is roughly $6 billion. We spoke with Senate Appropriations Chairman Buck Clark, a Republican from Hollandale, and House Appropriations Committee member Steve Holland, a Democrat from Tupelo, about their thoughts on fiscal year 2019 state budget heading into conference committees.
The word you see or the word you hear when they walk in is, please give us level funding. They mean please give us for FY19 the same amount we were appropriated with FY18. A lot of agencies, they've had attrition. They've cut their staff. They have a lot of unfilled positions as it was, and they're just asking. We made things work. A lot of our great agency heads that have, again, cut expenses and still maintain their core mission are able to do it at the level of funding they have. And, every one of them comes in, though, while they may request level funding, they will tell you about, now, to do more, I really would need to have this. And, and we've got to hear that. I tell them, say, look, don't hold back. Please let me know about where we would need to go and what resources it would take to get there. Because we're always trying to move the ball down the field. And anyway, that's what we're hearing right now. But it's kind of a level funding mentality right now.
Well, there's no doubt it's going to be, if we have a just pro forma year this year, it's going to be a modern miracle. Our revenues have not come in like they were projected, so that's going to mean less money. We've had a few good months, and we always hold out hope, but the bottom line is budgets, state agencies are going to suffer this year, just as they have the last 3 or 4 years. There are going to be cuts in some. One, mental health, we're trying to keep level funding from last year, and I hope that happens, and they'll be happy. And most other agencies will be happy if they can get level funding. I'm just not sure all of them can. So you're going to see some decrease in governmental services again because of not the fact that so much that the revenue's not coming in, but we've cut the revenue stream in the last few years with so many tax cuts, and it's not a balancing act. So we got less money. That's the bottom line.
The State Library Commission is one agency fighting for level funding. Interim Director Sharman Smith says the commission had nearly $300,000 taken out of its budget for next year. We spoke with her earlier this week.
Well, it looks pretty dire at the moment. Both the House and the Senate have passed versions of our budget that at legislative budget recommendation, which is $277,000 less than we have in 2018. We have not had anybody who has actually closed a library, but what they have done is reduce hours to the point that for many members of the community, it might as well be closed because they're not open during the hours that they can get to the library. And that is really very critical when you think about the importance of libraries in local communities. Libraries are not about books. Libraries are about a place for people to gather, and they're about a place for people to use computers.
If you have such a large chunk taken out of your budget, are we also looking at possible job cuts?
It's possible. Of course, we won't know what the agency has to do if we have that kind of cut until we see what cut does come. Obviously, it would be the agency's intent to protect our staff to the extent that we could, and certainly would be our intent that we protect the staffs of public libraries to the extent that we can. Those are the people who deliver the services. You may cut the services, but when you cut the people, the service no longer exists.
The state employees union is asking lawmakers for a pay increase. Members of the Mississippi Alliance of State Employees Local 3570 rallied at the Capitol on Tuesday. The group's president, Brenda Scott, says the last pay raise for state workers was during the Haley Barbour administration. She says state employees in Mississippi are paid considerably less than those in surrounding states. Scott blames Republican leadership.
These top 3 leaders in this state haven't assumed the voice of our state workers who rise early, stay later, currently working for a state where it's okay for them to be paid on an average of over $9,000 less than the 4 surrounding states of Tennessee, Louisiana, Alabama, and Arkansas. Why can't they honor the state employees' service and match that appreciation with acts of deeds reflecting their words? Talk is cheap.
The union has represented state workers for the past 28 years. A longtime House member, now retired, was honored by the House this week. Former House member Tyrone Ellis represented Clay, Lowndes, and Oktibbeha counties for 38 years. The Democrat was first elected to the House in 1979. Ellis was surrounded by family members as he was praised for his years of public service. He announced his retirement last summer. District 38 is now served by Democrat Sheck Taylor of Starkville. Let's get straight to the point with views from both sides of the aisle. Now, Austin Barber is a Republican national strategist. He's the founding partner of the Clearwater Group. Brandon Jones is a Democrat. He's an attorney with the Beria Jones law firm and a former member of the House. Welcome you both back to At Issue. Welcome you back, Austin. This week we've got lots of politics to talk about this week, even since last week when we had lots of politics to talk about, most notably Chris McDaniel's announcement. Austin, is Roger Wicker now the happiest man in Washington?
Well, listen, I think he certainly has a very easy course to re-election. He has no Republican primary opponent. We'll see what happens with the Democrats who filed for this race, David Beria and a couple of others whose names I forget, I'm sorry. But yeah, I mean, Roger Wicker is definitely happy. He built a huge war chest. He had $4 or $5 million in the bank. He's got a very conservative voting record. He has the endorsement of the President of the United States. He's got the endorsement of a very popular governor of the state of Mississippi. He was in a great position to win what would have been a tough primary, no question about that. Chris McDaniel has a big following, was going to have financial support himself, and he would have given Roger Wicker a tough run. Roger Wicker would have won, but certainly, to answer your question definitively, Roger Wicker is a very happy person today.
You said an easier path to the to winning, certainly to the primary, but Brandon, I assume you would argue he still has a battle to fight on the primary level against your law partner.
Yeah, that's right. I think that what David would like to see, Representative Beria, is to have an opportunity to have a real race in Mississippi that is on the issues and that's substantive and where Democrats actually kind of show where exactly we are. One of my critiques of my own party is that over the course of the last several cycles, we really haven't managed to get to full strength by November at any point. Mm-hmm. And so in some ways, we don't really know where we are in terms of our overall strength. And so in order for that to change, and perhaps in order for folks to have a real choice, it would require one of these candidates to come through the primary and to talk in a way that really makes this about the real choices between the parties, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's health care, whether it's, basic education issues, and see where we land on that. And so I think that's the campaign that Beria wants to run. We'll see, but I think he's planning on making it as tough as possible.
And if I'm going back in my mind here, the last time we may have had a serious statewide Republican versus Democrat race may have been 2008. I ran Roger Wicker's race in 2008. Trent Lott stepped down late December of 2007. Haley appointed Roger. Roger ran against Ronnie Musgrove. Mm-hmm. And of course, that was a very serious election. I can remember seeing tracking polling where we were down 8 points, 2 months out. There may have been one in 2011 that I'm just not thinking of, but certainly that was a very serious race. So I can understand Brandon's logic in this, but it's going to be very difficult for David Beria to win that race. And I got to think, and I don't know, that David Beria and any other Democrat that's in the race against Roger Wicker may be looking to make a move.
Well, I can tell you, Representative Berry's perspective on this is there are no gimmies, and every step of the way is going to be very difficult. So I think he and the other candidates are taking the primary very seriously and certainly looking at this for what it is, which is an uphill fight. And I've said it before many times on this show, there's absolutely no reason in the world for Democrats to get cocky about any of this. They're going to have to really prosecute a campaign in a way that has not been done, as we just mentioned, in a decade. And so there's a lot of work that's going to have to go into this. But, you know, for Wicker to be able to get to November without a primary, there's no way that he cannot be tremendously relieved, because no matter how you feel about Chris McDaniel, we do know he knows how to fight in a primary, and as you said, his folks are pretty motivated.
And it can allow Roger Wicker to go back to doing the type of messaging that he probably really wants to do, which is more positive ads, be more positive on the stump, versus the contrast or negative stuff that many candidates are forced to do because you're in a really competitive primary.
Which had already begun before McDaniel announced his intention to move to the other race. And let's talk about that race now. Who will the governor now appoint to replace Senator Cochran on an interim basis after his retirement? Who will he appoint? Who should he appoint?
Well, I don't know. I have intentionally tried to stay out of the middle of the politics of who the governor is going to appoint. And you know, the governor was quoted earlier that he's got a list of people, and Chris McDaniel is not on the list. So we know who he's not going to appoint. He's not going to appoint Chris McDaniel. Certainly Chris already knew that. I would assume most of the people who were at that press conference probably realized that Chris is not going to get appointed by the governor, but they felt like they needed to go do that for their own various reasons. There's a short list. Obviously, you know, at the top of the list is Tate Reeves. It certainly is going to be a tough decision for him. If he wanted to, he could have that appointment. He could win that race. There's no doubt about it. He's the top of the ticket. And then I think you go Delbert Hosemann. I think you've got, you know, the Speaker Philip Gunn, Cindy Hyde-Smith. You know, those are others, Stacey Pickering, that he could choose. Probably there may be a couple of young state senators or others that he could look at, but I think that's sort of the top of the list that the governor is going to choose from.
Because I think Chris McDaniel essentially has made the argument that, look, if he just appoints me, although there was this other group that said he should do that, if he appoints me, then you've got me in place, and that pretty much assures a Republican victory in November. For the good of the party, just appoint McDaniel. Could you make that argument?
Well, sure, you could make that argument. There's absolutely that you can make that argument, but that doesn't mean that it's the right thing to do in the governor's perspective. And the governor has clearly stated, I'm not going to appoint Chris. So, I mean, Chris can ask for that, and he certainly has the right to ask for that. And it's probably the smart thing for him to do from a political standpoint to go that route this week. But it's not going to happen because the governor has stated that it's not going to happen.
So come November, we'll have, when we have this open race that has no primary, we know we'll have McDaniel in the race. We know we will have the governor's appointee most likely in the race, and at least one strong Democrat in Mike Espy and whoever else might come along. Is there a chance that the Democrats could win this race based on those two strong Republicans splitting the Republican vote?
Yeah, I think so, and I want to talk about that, but I think we just broke news here. Number one, there's a vast right-wing conspiracy, and my friend Austin isn't a part of it, which is deeply disappointing. I was kind of hoping you were in that group.
No conspiracies for me today.
And secondly, this is a news flash. Our viewers at home might not be prepared for this, but Chris McDaniel is not a unifying figure. And so, look, politicians are in the habit of giving press releases, and I appreciate that. And we all kind of give aspirational press releases because we want to say what we hope the image of us is. But no matter how he projects, and no matter how you feel about him, positive or negative, one thing you cannot say is that he has been deeply unifying. That race 4 years ago was nasty. It was ugly in a whole host of ways. I mean, before it was over, there was actually human wreckage in its path. The folks are impassioned, and I salute them for that, and I think we should encourage a certain amount of passion to come to these political races. But that's not what we would call unifying. And so I think it's very disingenuous for him to get behind the camera and to suggest that somehow he's going to bring the world together, because he's never been about that. And you can't say in one breath, I'm draining the swamp, and then in the next breath, let's all get along. But having a figure like that, a polarizing figure like that, it exposes a couple of things. It exposes that the Republican Party is in fact not in lockstep. And what we thought might have been over, this Tea Party movement, in some form or fashion, whether it's a Bannon version or whether it's a Chris McDaniel version, still very much threatens the long-term success of the Republican Party. And so, as a Democrat, you watch this and you think, well, if Republicans are preoccupied fighting over issues like the flag, or fighting over issues like who has taken their picture the most times with President Trump, do I think that opens up an opportunity for Democrats? Absolutely. I mean, Democrats can enter into that and say, we want to treat you like adults, and we want to talk about the issues that matter. And these guys over here in the Republican Party, they might have had power a little bit too long to recognize that fighting over who likes Trump the most isn't a real issue for Mississippians. So possibilities are there.
We got to get into some math here. I mean, first of all, there's no way I'll make this statement today. I said weeks ago that I thought Chris would get into the special election, and he did it. And I wouldn't have any conversations with Chris to know that. It was just my gut. I think he made, if I was Chris McDaniel, I would have made the same decision. It's an easier race for him to win. Chris McDaniel can absolutely win this special election. Chris McDaniel could absolutely represent Mississippi in the United States Senate January of 2019. I have no doubt about that. He can win this race. But I must make this point. Mike Espy will not be the only Democrat in this race. There's no way that will happen. There will be other seasoned Democrat elected officials or business owners or whomever who say, I can go win that race. Why should I not get in there as well? And then we're going to get into the sort of some basic math. You know, how's it all going to work out? Because obviously this will go to a runoff. Even if you just have Espy, McDaniel, and whoever the governor appoints, that's going to end up in a runoff. But I think you will have another strong Democrat, and certainly Mike Espy is a strong, respected Democrat name in the state of Mississippi. The Espy family has done a lot in Mississippi. He's got some baggage, but they all have got baggage, and it'll all come out in the wash as we get into this process. But so we'll see how that ends up working out. But I think you'll have 4 serious candidates most likely in this race: 2 Dems and 2 Republicans.
Well, we know no matter who's appointed, Espy will be the most qualified. I mean, you're talking about a former cabinet member. You're talking about a person of substance and somebody who, some of that stuff that we talk about in terms of issues, he was vindicated on much of that. And a lot of it is really not something that's hanging out there. And frankly, in the Trump era, what is a scandal? Yeah. I mean, it certainly isn't what they accused him of.
We've got these 2 Senate races coming up. We've also got Greg Harper's House seat that'll be open and declared candidates for these various races. Do you think we'll see any other switches, people switching from one race to another? You mentioned Greg Harper's name, and his name has been on my mind because I know Congressman Harper a little bit and have been impressed with him, although we didn't always agree. And I think this goes back to what I was thinking a moment ago. As a Democrat, obviously, I'm not cheerleading for Republicans to figure this stuff out. But when I see some of the reasonable people, like Congressman Harper, kind of leave public service, and an increasing number of Republicans across the country retiring and resigning, it signifies to me that this is a bit of a crucible moment for Republicans to decide who they really are. And they have a chance here to be exceedingly reactionary and continue the politics of 2016 on into the future and see where that lands them, or to try to get back to some of the ones who would like to see some governance. And I think we're increasingly, Austin, kind of escaping some of those folks are kind of turning away from this process. And I'll be honest with you, it's a little discouraging because ideally I think we would have reasonable people, whether it's a Democratic candidate or a Republican candidate, who is actually focused in on the issues that they actually have to tackle when they get elected.
Yeah, I think to answer your question, there won't be any switches. I think the main candidates that are in the 3rd Congressional District race, Whit Hughes, Michael Guest, Sally Doty, Perry Parker, those folks of the world will stay in that race. I think they all feel like they've got a realistic chance to make a runoff and then to win a 3-week runoff in that. I think there'll be less people voting in that congressional primary since Senator Wicker and Chris McDaniel are not going to have a battle against each other in a Republican primary. So I don't think you'll see any more switches from that kind of race, but I do definitively feel like there will be Democrats who will leave the general election race against Roger Wicker to get into the Thad Cochran open race.
What about what Brandon says about Greg Harper? Are we losing too many good people, and did his departure really throw the whole plan into a frenzy?
No, I don't think so. And look, I think Greg Harper made those decisions because he felt like it was right for him and his family. I'm not sure that he did it, because of why others are doing it. You had others that are retiring because they were in seats that they felt like were going to be difficult to win, to either win versus someone who may be more conservative than them in a primary, or against someone who was a Democrat who may beat them. I think that's what you saw more of them. And in Washington, it's a tough place. It is. It's partisan. There's constant bickering. There's not enough stuff that gets done. Look, it would be very difficult for me to say, yeah, I want to go run for Congress or for the U.S. Senate to go to Washington, try to get stuff done for my state.
Speaking of Washington, what do you make of McDaniel's allegation that Washington is involved in the governor's decision of whom to appoint for Cochran's seat?
I've seen no traction of anybody from Mitch McConnell's world, and I bet Mitch McConnell's got 0.5% name ID in the state of Mississippi, but they love to use that name. I have seen nothing of any substance or record of the National Republican Senatorial Committee or Senator McConnell's efforts to try to influence what happens in Mississippi. But that's just sort of more of the messaging that they want to get out there, and I don't blame them for that.
And for Democrats, we kind of find ourselves pulling our hair out, and this is why we've got to get better at executing campaigns, because I would love to have the conversation about, in Mitch McConnell, you've got an ineffective traditionalist who has been able to do virtually nothing in his time as leader of the Senate. And Chris is auditioning to become like Tom Cotton or Ted Cruz, or I think it's Tom, or Ted Cruz, and be equally ineffective, if not more so, as one of the people who stand outside of the process and scream at it. And people in Mississippi are left with, from a policy standpoint, nothing at all.
We'll let that be the last word. Brandon, Austin, thank you both, and we thank you for joining us on At Issue. We're out of time. Don't forget, you can watch the program on our website, mpbonline.org/issue, and we invite you to join us again next Friday evening here on MPB for another edition of At Issue. Good night.